Hi, everybody.
Welcome. Should we do our antic? No. Yeah, we're moving on. We're moving past that antic. This is the new installment.
We could
do a dance. Anything to brighten up this dreary day, right?
Yes.
So welcome everyone to Longevity Kitchen, where we explore long living cultures. I'm going to first introduce myself, and then my partner and colleague will introduce herself. So I am Lori Bombaco. I'm an oncology dietitian, and I've been in practice since 2004. I joined Cancer Wellness Center in 2014, 15. So I've been here about 5 or 6 years, and I work part-time. So I have several responsibilities. So I meet with individuals who are interested to learn more specifically about what to or what not to eat based on where they are in their journey with cancer. I also co-facilitate a couple of groups. One is called Weight Loss for Wellness. And then we have those members join our graduates group. I also partner with Debbie in this series called Longevity Kitchen. And it is probably my favorite aspect of what I do here at the center. Mostly because we're here in the kitchen and we get to play around a little bit. But truly, I think with what I know about food and nutrition, the trickiest part is helping people understand how to find ingredients and cook for themselves in ways that will make an impact for them. Because I can talk about healthy food all day long, but unless someone is able to actually execute it, what's the point, right? So thank you all for that, for allowing me to introduce myself and share a little bit more about me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Debbie Cronenberger. I am our wellness program coordinator. I'm a mental health counselor and yoga and meditation teacher. My specialty is mindfulness, and Lori and I partner because I do the behavioral aspect of healthy lifestyle, and she addresses the nutritional aspects of healthy lifestyle. So as she mentioned, we partner on quite a few programs, which is super fun.
Always.
Yeah. We have a good time together, and it's been a really great partnership. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. For those who have returned, we're
Thank you
glad
for coming
to see
back.
you again. Yeah.
I love it.
I've been at the Cancer Wellness Center since 2006, and I was hired in 2007. I came as a student, and I've been here ever since. They can't get rid of me.
No.
They can't get rid of me. So I encourage you to try out our yoga classes, our meditation classes, our mindfulness class, and all the other things we do. We're going to be partnering on a new program, probably in 2021, Lori and I. And of course, if you're interested in our weight loss program, we currently just started our last session of 2020, and we will be probably embarking on another session in 2021. It's a really fun program. If you know anybody that's in that program, you can ask them about it. So today we start our series, Longevity Kitchen, because we were just blown away by some research that we saw, right? And probably many of you have seen the research and the books and all the hype about the blue zones. And we really thought that was so interesting. And we went out and we read a lot about it, and thought, well, gosh, this is so interesting. It's really what we espouse all the time anyway,
right?
But to explore these long living cultures around the world just kind of like gives us a little more oomph to the message, right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. What a good way of putting it. Yeah.
So today we are going to explore Okinawa.
Yes.
But we have a lot of other cultures around the world which we're going to be introducing. And they are Icaria, Greece.
Yeah.
Right. Sardinia, Italy. What,
We traveled here in the States to Loma Linda,
Loma
California.
Linda, California.
And then we go south to Costa Rica, to the Nicoya Peninsula.
Yes, okay, so you'll see that if you come to further sessions with us, that we will be exploring and talking extensively about these different cultures around the world. And culturally, they differ.
Yes.
You know, culturally, they differ. And a lot of, you'll see today, we're going to show you some really unusual ingredients today. They focus on specific ingredients that are specific to their environment
Right.
and their cultures,
Right.
right?
That had meaning along the way for them throughout generations. So geographically, they used what was available to them according to the seasons, according to the climate.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're going to do each class is highlight some specific ingredients that meant something for that culture and played probably a key role in their longevity. So let's just actually talk for a moment about what longevity is.
Okay.
Like, what does that word really mean? Longevity.
Yeah, I know. It's like a 25-cent word. I think. It's not like a word where you would be like, wow, where did you pull that out of?
Agreed. Yeah.
But yeah, what do we mean by that? Why explore, right?
Why do we care about longevity?
Mhm.
Which, in I think at first glance, the word longevity means you live long. Okay, that's okay. I could take that. I wouldn't mind living a long life, but I would hope that the life that I live is of good quality, right? I don't want to live a life that's where I'm not thriving, where I'm maybe isolated because I'm not independent. I need care because I'm frail. We find that in the longevity cultures, that's actually the opposite, right? They're thriving, they're living a long life, but they're thriving throughout their life and into old age.
Their quality of life seems to be a lot better as they age than the quality of life that we experience aging here.
Yeah.
And we find that such a large portion of our elderly are sickly.
Yeah.
And what we find as we read about these cultures, we find that the common theme is that they eat healthy foods for their region.
Yeah.
That they socially are connected.
Right.
And they're active.
Super, super active. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's very little being overweight or significantly overweight. There's a little chubbiness around, but not a lot of significantly overweight. And they are really active.
Yeah.
Right? Up until the end.
Up until the end. Well, I was just thinking about how you were sharing how here we have a society where as we age, we're really become less of part of a society, right? We're kind of, and I think that's because of the lifestyles that we live. We're go, go, go. We drive everywhere. We eat fast food. We have other people make our food. So, we don't have time or patience or even the resources to help our elderly who need our help. But in these long living cultures, what you'll see is that the elderly are not cast aside. In fact, they're utilized because they can contribute so much to the family. Mm-hmm. And it's probably because their environment affords that, right? Rather than riding cars, I think as we get older, we're become a little more afraid to drive a car around, especially around here, right? But in some of the long living cultures, they can walk, right? Mm-hmm. And that forces them to be physically active, but they're afforded the opportunity to still be a part of society, I think is what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And there's many things that contribute to the lifestyle, and it's not necessarily a wealthy lifestyle,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that like terrain contributes to health. A lot of these cultures are in hilly places, in villages and little small cities that are tucked away, where they're old cities and villages where the roads are not necessarily conducive to driving everywhere, and they're almost forced to walk and be active and move. There aren't retirement homes,
No.
and assisted living and all these other things. The elderly are still living at home and still living in these kind of geographically isolated but densely populated areas where they have neighbors who know them, and their family continues to be there. And they're usually part of a church or some sort of community organization. They usually live by a highly ritualized life or structured life where every day at 1 o'clock they meet in the village center and have coffee or wine in the afternoon or whatever it happens to be. And these lifestyles are not without sugar or caffeine or alcohol. They're not without they are without deprivation, but what we find is that the lifestyle is very simple. And in that simplicity, we find super healthy things.
I love that. Yeah, because I think that that's what intrigues me about the long living cultures, are that it really is about, especially as it relates to their food choices and their diets, that it is really about the basics. And so you'll see with the recipes that we prepare in each class that there's really a handful of ingredients that are of high quality, but just so simple. And they impart great flavor, great nutrition, as we'll discuss. And I think the way that our society approaches food and nutrition, it's so far beyond that. It's taken us to a place where it's so complicated, and it becomes overwhelming for people to really help them navigate something as basic as what to eat. And I think that that's something that I've discovered later in my career, that I think it's a tragedy for someone to have to suffer through that, decision-making process about what to eat, what not to eat. And when really we find in these long living cultures, it's so simple. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, and we find in the simplicity and in the it's these cultures, like I mentioned before, are not wealthy cultures, and so they use the ingredients that we consider commonplace in our culture. A lot of times they use them very sparingly, and they use what Lori described as the basics. Right?
Yeah.
And we'll get into more detail with each culture when we look at the basics that they rely on.
Yeah. So let's now talk about our current destination.
Were we going to review the SAD diet a little bit? Or
Sure.
am I getting ahead of us? Or...
Do you want to talk about, so today we're going to visit Okinawa.
Oh, yeah.
And so what we're going to touch on in this area, which is a part of Japan.
An island.
Yes, they're unique. So
an island in the Japanese Sea, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know what I was going to just say.
But we're going to talk about why that matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that there's like this. And just to kind of go back a little bit to what Debbie was sharing, there's like these densely pocketed areas that they seem to be isolated. And it's almost like over time, their behavior is incubated, and it brought about health for them. Because they haven't deviated much, despite Westernization and our influence on the rest of the world, they still have seemed to stick to what they've done for thousands of years, and it's working for them. Yeah.
Yeah, and the foods that they've cultivated for these long periods of time. And interestingly, they have these foods provide a healthy lifestyle that, like, we're discovering the health of it, but they've been,
Yeah.
I don't think they talk much about nutrition, but the combination of foods that they tend to eat uh, is a nutritious
Yes.
combination.
Yeah. And
Right.
they just, without really knowing any better, they went with it because they probably, I mean, there is some understanding with some of the spices and herbs we're going to talk about in each class that they probably did possess, and they do possess medicinal properties.
Mhm.
And so, but they become kind of like folklore, I would say, and then this gets passed on through the generations. But now that we have science today, we can prove that what they believed all along is actually probably the case.
Yes.
So fun.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So interesting.
I think the
Yeah.
other day I saw how the Native Americans grow corn,
Yeah.
and how they didn't have science to say, well, this takes nitrogen out of the
Right.
soil or this or that. But they knew that if they plant the corn grows, the beans have something to climb up on the corn,
Yeah.
and the squash is down below, and that prevents weeds and holds in moisture.
Yes.
And also, that combination keeps the soil healthy.
Yeah.
I don't remember specifically why, but they had all these cultures have this knowledge, like Lori said, almost like folklore. But turns out they really knew what they were doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
So we should maybe think more about just think differently, I would say, right? And that a return to basics is potentially a really good thing for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do you want to talk about the SAD diet?
I think we should introduce it because I really, so much of what we talk about is about being mindful.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about the SAD diet, mindful of our food choices, mindful of the ingredients we use, mindful of our lifestyle, mindful about how we think,
Yeah.
right, and what that creates, etc. And if we're just kind of wandering around on autopilot and we're kind of embracing the American culture, we're not necessarily doing ourselves a favor in terms of the nutritional choices that we make. And it's
Yeah.
so interconnected, healthy mind, healthy body, healthy body, healthy mind. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the standard American diet so that you folks really begin to think about the choices that you're making and become more mindful about the choices that you're making.
Yeah. So I'm guessing we have some participants in the crowd today who have heard me use this expression, the SAD diet, it's an acronym that stands for the Standard American Diet. And I wish I came up with it because I think it's so clever, because it's a way to describe the way that Americans eat, which is quite sad. Sad, sad, sad. And it really has, what a lot of experts believe has really contributed to some of our health concerns, including overweight and obesity, including some of our chronic diseases, because eating the SAD diet is really, it's a combination of two things, and that's what's problematic about it. So first and foremost, the SAD diet is characterized by these ultra processed foods. So what the heck is ultra processed foods? How do we even begin to understand what those are? Well, the best way to describe them is to think about how it's a food item that has been so far removed, like here's a bell pepper, so far removed from its original package, right? So typically ultra processed foods are in a package, in a box, in a bag, and they hardly resemble food. It is an imitation of food, I would say, at its best. And so it's devoid of nutrients because it's so far removed from the original form. And then it also has this accumulation of other ingredients and additives, particularly salt and sugars and some of our added fats.
Yeah, and like processed fats.
Yeah.
What would be like a what would be like a knee-jerk food that
Oh,
you could
gosh.
mention?
What do you think I'm gonna say?
Okay, I think you're gonna say either
What's the stereotypical
either
ultra
a
processed-
Dorito,
a Dorito, good one. I was going there.
or
Or
an Oreo.
an Oreo. Basically my childhood diet. Yes, because what are they? I mean, what is
I don't know
food?
what they are.
Is it food? No, it's manufactured. It's manufactured. And because it's not really food, and especially quality food, it has no taste. So they have to add all this stuff on top of it to give it some taste. And unfortunately, it's probably too much. And we become kind of acquainted with that over time. And we develop this taste or this preference for these zinger foods, as Debbie puts it.
Yeah.
They zing our taste buds, you know, and food science
Yes.
is like a relatively young field, but made possible because of the SAD diet, right?
Yes. And, you have to remember we live in a and we're not going to talk politics.
No.
But we do live in a capitalist country. And, clearly we have a food industry that is very interested in making a profit. And when they get us to liking their foods more than other foods, they get to make money. And so they do their best to do that. And what happens is that we get very acquainted with and we develop preferences for these highly manufactured foods, which intentionally are manufactured to zing our brains. So if you think about it, be mindful about it the next time you have an Oreo or a Dorito, which are delicious.
They are delicious.
Delicious. But really take a bite and notice what happens in your body. I mean, it is responding like
Thank
a
you.
10,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's like a 10, yum, right? And what happens behaviorally is that we begin to prefer those foods over other foods. And we have to when we get back to the basics,
Yes.
the healthy foods, we have to retrain our brains and our palate so that we begin to prefer these foods. But when you do that, and then you go back to the highly processed foods, your body will respond.
Yes.
And it'll say, oh, that's too sweet, or oh, that's too salty, or oh, that makes me feel that when I eat that, I feel sick.
Yeah.
Right. And it does happen.
Yes.
It does happen because I've experienced it.
Personally.
Yes,
same.
personally, yes. And so we want you to become a little bit more mindful about that process because it's a little manipulative, right?
I think so.
Yeah. And most importantly, not healthy, right? Not healthy.
And so what you'll often hear Debbie and I say or suggest is that I think a good example is the artificial sweeteners, which are literally hundreds of times sweeter than natural table sugar, hundreds of times. So imagine if you're used to having a cup of coffee or tea and you're using artificial sweeteners, or you buy an ultra processed product that uses these artificial sweeteners, you start to think that that's what sweet should taste like, hundreds of times the amount of what natural sugar is. So we're going to flip on you and say, you know what, let's just go back to basics and go with the simple ingredient. Try sugar, because you're going to learn how much is just enough for that sweetness for you. And that's not harmful. We find that you're going to learn in the long living cultures that there are some ingredients or nutrients like carbohydrates or fat, that have given them such good health. So that's definitely a concept that we find the long living cultures has really confirmed for us. Yeah. On the flip side of the SAD diet, so we talked about these ultra processed foods and how they are devoid of nutrition. That's the flip side. So not only are we maybe having too high calories, too many sugars and salts and fats, but the problem might be that we're not eating enough of the really good stuff, right? So that's the other characteristic, that's the second part of the SAD diet, that it's devoid. So there's this absence of these wonderful compounds, nutrients that promote our health. And so what we're working towards doing, hopefully in this series, is helping you understand how to gradually step away from the SAD diet and start to return to basics by fortifying your body with these super nutrient dense foods.
Yeah. And how blessed are we?
Yes.
We get to explore Okinawa
Yes.
and not have such a hard time finding some of these cool ingredients
Yes.
that we can share with you and talk to you about and introduce you to and tell you, where did we shop? We shopped at Trader Joe's.
Our faves.
Yeah, our favorite. But we're not like Instagram influencers though.
At all.
Trader Joe's does not care if
No.
we shop there or not, truly. But we love it there. Some Whole Foods, I think.
I went to Whole Foods, yes. And then also to Fresh Farms.
Yeah.
Where you'll find they have really interesting produce. So that's where we go for several of our classes. But I love that. I love the point that Debbie's making. We don't have to travel to Okinawa to be able to enjoy some of their simple staples. And we are so fortunate because of that. So we may introduce you to things that you've never seen before. And we're also going to reintroduce you to things that you have seen, but maybe learn to prepare them in a different way, or just discover how best to use them.
Yeah.
I love
Like
that.
this.
The leek. I was just looking at
This
that.
bad boy.
That's how we're socially distancing ourselves. That leek is like 1.5 feet long. So.
If you say something I don't like, the leek is going to come to your side.
Yes, and so we have, and we're going to explore each class the highlight ingredients that we think you should know about, and show you how to use them in some really yummy but simple recipes.
Mm-hmm.
They're so quick, the recipes we make today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also remember that we live in such a fabulous time where we can just say, oh, well, I was at the Fresh Farm and they have these bitter melons, or they have these purple potatoes, and we can just tap in our phone, recipe for purple potatoes,
Yeah.
and it'll blow up. So we encourage you to experiment with some of the ingredients that we're going to introduce to you today.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, right? Like we could do our own spin on the Okinawan way, right? We don't have to don't put that pressure on yourself that it has to be perfect, because if you tried one new food today from today's lesson, that would be amazing. So just keep that in mind. We always want you in the kitchen and starting wherever you are. So if you aren't as confident in your skills, take just something, right? And that's a major improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we are going to overview some of the aspects of long living cultures and get a little bit more specific, because what we notice with the long living cultures is that, as we said before, there's an increased health span and quality of life, not just lifespan. And what they're focused on is quality of life. They're not focused on living longer so much. But what happens is because they're socializing and they feel connected and part of a community, because they're moving, and it's not, the Stairmaster at the gym, it's walking to somebody's house for a cup of coffee or whatever. But they're active gardening, fishing. It's a very active life. They're foraging for mushrooms and herbs that grow kind of naturally around. They live a purposeful life. I think I'd rather use that word.
Yeah.
It's a very purposeful life where food and preparing the food and preparing it with other people. The rhythm of life is really what they're focused on. A lot different than us, boy, a lot different than us. And so then what we find when they're focused on those things, and they're as elderly, they are included in everyday life, caring for children, cooking, given tasks, just like you would give age appropriate tasks for children. The elderly in these communities are given age appropriate tasks. So, they're not going to be like plowing a field behind a water buffalo or something, but, maybe they'd be part of a harvest in some other way. What happens is when they do that, they actually tend to live longer, just as a result.
Yeah.
Right? We see lower levels of cancer, right? Lower levels of heart disease, right?
Yeah.
The two big killers, of our society.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a very economical way of life. These are not super wealthy cultures. They're not poor cultures, but there is enough to eat. But it's mostly what's available locally. And you'll see lots of use of beans, lots of use of vegetables and fruits, which they grow there, lots of use of herbs and spices, etc. And it is a mindset also. And it's a mindset that centers around the rhythm of a purposeful life, which includes, really so importantly, which we tend to lack a lot of, particularly in these times, not that they're not experiencing this too, it is a lack of loneliness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we know that loneliness is really bad for us.
Yeah.
Really bad for us. And so, did I forget anything, do you think? Or
No, you even talked about a little bit about food. Look at us rubbing off on each other.
Oh, Lord. Okay. I'll turn it over to you, for you to talk about.
And we're gonna, specifically for the Okinawans, why not being lonely matters. We're gonna talk about that in just a moment, because I think that's so important, especially now with what is going on for all of us.
Yeah, we have to make an extra effort.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm not sure what you wanted me to talk about that.
Well, maybe in
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So with our long living cultures, you will see that there are some themes that basically of the foods that they eat or their diets, right? So diet here meaning the food that someone eats over a lifetime, not that they're on a specific plan or off a diet. Diet meaning the foods they eat in a pattern. So the longevity cultures basically think the opposite of the SAD diet. So if you're looking to kind of compare what we eat as Americans to these long living cultures, they are on complete opposite sides of the spectrum, essentially. They have very few ingredients and they do not rely on ultra processed foods. They cook for themselves all the time, and they're cooking from scratch, right? So they don't go to restaurants, they don't order takeout, they don't even use grocery stores or delivery, right? So they go back to the basics. And what many of them had to do is rely on what was locally available and in season for them. And it's an interesting thought that what was available is what brought about health for the culture. For whatever reason, right? Could it be in the spring there were specific herbs that flourished and they brought about immune protection for some of these cultures? Very interesting concept if you think about that. But they were super resourceful and they just relied on what they had around. And as it turns out, much of it is plant-based. So when I use the word plant-based diet, I'm not suggesting that it means a vegan diet, which means absolutely no animal products at all. But I mean to say that most of the meals are based on plant foods. Okay, so plant foods meaning our starchy vegetables, our non-starchy vegetables, our fruit, our legumes like beans and lentils. They also use whole grains. And so that's primarily what they eat. So they have a lot of this reliance on these plant foods, which are, again, absent in the SAD diet, I would say. We make fake plant foods in the SAD diet, but not the long living cultures. They eat the real deal. They have their real plant foods. They also they use lots of herbs and spices for flavor. Okay, so we talked about these ultra processed foods having these additives for flavor. But they just go, again, to what's available locally and seasonally, and they rely on that for their flavor. But as it turns out, spices and herbs, besides the flavor, they also impart nutritious properties. And so they really kind of got like a 1-2 kind of win-win for that, for being able to use them. If we're going to compare nutrient intake of the long living cultures to the SAD diet, I would say by far the biggest difference is that the long living cultures have a lot of fiber, And mostly it's because they're eating an abundance of plant foods, and Americans really do not eat that fiber. And so fiber has a lot of roles. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we demonstrate the recipes. But we should probably be eating more fiber here.
Yeah.
We're missing out big time.
Yeah.
What do they drink? Well, they don't drink juices or sodas or even these coffee beverages, right? Nothing fancy. They drink mostly water, but then they sprinkle in things like tea as well as coffee, and then occasionally some wine. And we're going to talk about how each culture has very specific choices that probably matter for that culture. What they don't do, I'm just going to skip to that, what they don't do in the longevity cultures is they don't do a lot of ultra processed foods or animal foods. And again, this is probably because they just didn't have the resources to be able to, or they just, where they were geographically, weren't able to enjoy any animal food. So they have a very low consumption of red meat as well as dairy. Those living in coastal areas, they might enjoy some seafood and shellfish, but still in a really fish, yeah, in a much smaller quantity. They actually would rather have the seaweed and the sea vegetables than they would the seafood and fish. So they also have a lot less sugar. I think if we're going to compare the standard American diet to any longevity culture, they have a lot less sugar. A lot.
Yeah, I think if you notice, if you've ever been out of the country or someone comes to our country, they always say that our sweets are too sweet.
Yeah.
And when you sample sweets from another country, almost any other country,
yes,
their sweets are not as sweet. And we have a long history of sugar.
Yeah.
And we've been encouraged to have a lot of sugar for a lot of different reasons. And specifically in this country, which is so weird.
I know.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and what the long living cultures rely on for sweet is, what do you think? Good old fruit. That's how they enjoy dessert. If they have dessert, they don't even necessarily feel that it's necessary as part of what they're eating. So, their palate is a little bit more, it tends towards savory. Yeah. And so it's interesting that probably is passed down along the generations, but that's what they're used to. And that's and I think that's goes back to what Debbie has shared. It's a different way of thinking about food and what we need to eat or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to talk about specifically the Okinawan way?
Well, one of the things that we find also generally is that there's we Americans are the Buddhists. I'm generalizing because I don't know if all Buddhists do this, but like I've heard our culture be described as a greedy culture. Right?
Yeah.
And we tend to like over everything, right? Over the top everything. And what really characterizes these cultures is that there's a lot of moderation, and moderation in food and drink. And you see smaller portions. You see, if they're going to have a drink, it's in moderation. If they're going to have coffee, it's not like a 20-ounce.
Right. Right.
I mean, if anybody's ever had a 20-ounce Starbucks, I thought I had like half of one. And I thought I was gonna have to go to ER. But they're really trying to. They really, as part of their culture, live with more moderation, right?
Yeah.
It's become something that they value because they become wealthier over time. But it was a necessity when the cultures were less wealthy, that there wasn't necessarily enough to go around, that you didn't necessarily eat until you were overly full, etc. So we encourage you to start thinking in this way also. Really take a temperature reading the next time you sit down to a meal and really look at how hungry you are when you start the meal. And if you're focusing on your food, being mindful and really focusing on your food, which we hope you will all do, you're going to notice that you feel satisfied sooner because you're focusing on the food and you're experiencing it. And that's also what we find in these cultures, that there isn't a lot of eating in front of the TV. There's most of the time when meals are consumed, they're consumed with other people. And there's some sort of prayer or something that begins the meal. And that makes you stop and focus, right? Even if you're not a believer in prayer or whatever, even just stopping and focusing and being grateful for the meal that's in front of you, the ingredients that you were able to acquire, your ability to put it all together, mind and body, and then for the actual experience. And also, particularly if you have people around you, to be able to connect with others through this vehicle, which is one of the great pleasures of humanity. So you really want to start thinking about food a little bit differently. And it's not, and it's about, slowing down and taking in the experience. It was really interesting. The other day I was at watching a teenager eat a hamburger.
Oh no.
And I swear to you, he ate in like one bite half a hamburger. But he's a teenager.
I could just imagine Debbie's face.
Right? But like, if you really think about it, we kind of we rush when we eat, we stand up when we eat, we watch television when we eat. And we find that our eating behaviors, when we modify them even a little bit, it has a big effect on how much we eat and what we're eating, because we're actually thinking about it.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to introduce the behaviors associated with these cultures.
Yeah.
In terms of Okinawa,
let's talk specifically.
We
might do a little show and tell now too, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But the Okinawans, oof, I just think it's a little bit of all the cultures we explore. I think it's so unique. I really do, because we have two in the Mediterranean that we're going to visit, and then we have Loma Linda in Costa Rica. I think the Okinawans really set themselves apart in terms of their food. They are proud to be Okinawan. So even though they are part of Japan, they really are characteristically different. There are some similarities of Japanese food and Okinawan foods. They do eat a lot of vegetables, a lot of vegetables. That's primarily what their meals are consisting of. They also eat a good amount of soy. And so tofu being a primary protein choice for them. So we're going to cook some tofu today. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And similarly, and miso. So we also have some miso here. And both the Japanese and the Okinawans use miso. I'm going to talk, well, actually, since Debbie's showing it. So we got this, actually, I got that at Fresh Farms, but you will find miso in any grocery store. And what miso basically is soy with a grain. So that particular miso has rice. And then they add a mold to it and they ferment it. And so it turns into this paste.
Yeah, it's like, who thinks of this stuff?
Craziness, right? But probably because they didn't have refrigeration. So they would just ferment stuff. And so there's thousands of different types of miso. Thousands. Okay. We only have a handful here in the States that I've seen. But the different types of miso have to do with how long they're fermenting. So some of them are fermenting for a matter of just a couple weeks, some of them for months or years. And also, besides the soy, they may use a different type of a grain in the fermentation process. And so you'll get different flavors, different colors. Generally speaking, the darker the miso, the bolder the flavor. Mm-hmm. So if you're, not really sure about miso, or you haven't tried it yet, I would suggest to stick with the white miso that you see there. It's much more mild in terms of flavor. Mm-hmm. But speaking of flavor, I would say the Okinawan diet is the best way to describe it is umami.
Yes.
Total umami flavor, right? So umami is described as the fifth taste or the fifth flavor. And it was relatively recently labeled, I think in the 1980s, around there. That's when we started talking about umami. So we have sweet, we have salty, we have sour, and we have bitter, but then we have umami. And thank you, Okinawans, for bringing us umami, because I think it's my favorite by far. I just love umami.
I know. I do too.
I do.
But how do you describe that to someone? People are always like,
Yes.
well, what is umami? And it's like it's a flavor.
It's hard to describe. Yeah.
But it's like, if you think of it, how do you describe salt?
Yeah.
Or sugar. You say, oh, it's sweet, it's salty, but
yeah,
umami is savory.
It loosely translates to being pleasantly savory.
Yeah.
Right. So some people will say it's also kind of meaty, and it's also describing like a mouthfeel, but pleasantly savory. That's the best way to describe it.
So what would a umami flavored food be like? Like, could you give an example?
So some of our foods have umami flavor because what they think imparts the umami is this amino acid called, or a group of amino acids, glutamate. And so some foods naturally have glutamates in them. And so miso being one of them, mushrooms are another big one, huge. So like, this is why we like, if you like your hamburger grilled in the summer, try a portobello on the grill, and it will be a similar umami as that burger. It's kind of meaty and it has that mouthfeel. And then also seaweed. So I think this is why, the Okinawan diet is so best described as being umami, because many of their recipes and ingredients incorporate mushrooms and soy and the miso, as well as seaweed, which Debbie's going to show you. So they go to the sea and they use seaweed in a lot of different ways, a lot of different sauces. It's a really good way to start making what they make is dashi. And so dashi, and I'm going to talk about that actually in a moment. I just want to stick to the topic.
Okay.
So they also have, I mentioned a lot of vegetables, but particularly root vegetables. So I picked up a special type of radish. Ta-da!
Oops.
So that's daikon radish.
We peeled the end of it.
And you can eat it raw. So why do I love that
Crunchy.
you can eat this raw? If it's a radish, right? So guess what family daikon and all other radishes are in? What family of vegetables?
I don't know.
Dun, dun, dun. I'll give you a hint.
What?
So also in the same family as cabbage.
Cruciferous.
Cruciferous. Right. So we know cruciferous vegetables are so potent in terms of their properties to help protect us from cancer. They have compounds in them that talk to our genes. and they turn our genes on and off. They're signaling to them. But the compounds are usually destroyed through heat. So when you can have a raw cruciferous vegetable like daikon, then you get to have those compounds really in their best form and really offer you the best protection.
Mm.
Now, you might not be a great big fan of radish. You know, I kind of take it or leave it at times.
Yeah.
But daikon has like it's much more mild.
Yeah, it's not as peppery.
Yeah. And it's just like a root, you know, so like Debbie said, she just washed the outside and peeled it, and then she sliced it and you can have it raw. So it's a great choice.
Yeah, I've been kind of crunching on it all
I
morning.
know, she ate it. I wanted some.
Well, you can still have them.
Thank you. But use daikon how you might use radishes. You can just easily eat it the way that Debbie just demonstrated, or you can maybe even grate some into a coleslaw. You could put it into, I'm making a stir fry today. You could heat it up and put it into a stir fry that way. You could roast it. There's so many different ways to use it. They also, the Okinawans have a lot of soy products,
Yeah.
so particularly tofu. And this is what we're going to include today in one of our recipes. And tofu basically is like bean curd. So think about how they make cheese. That's how they make tofu. They set it into this nice block. And for the Okinawans, it was their principal source of protein. So this is where they found their protein, as well as other minerals. So I'm going to highlight some of those things. So this particular tofu is a brand called Wildwood, and it's extra firm. So what they do is they squeeze all that liquid out of it to create a little bit more of a dense product in the end. If you do not buy extra firm or super firm and you see medium firm or just firm, you want to press out that water. That allows you to really soak up more of the flavor that you're going to give to it. And then also for many people, they find it's much more palatable. Now, tofu is special because it has something called genistein. And genistein expresses, remember, just like the cruciferous vegetables, it talks to our genes. And so this genistein talks to a gene called the FOXO3. And that's a gene that is, believe it or not, associated with aging. So it slows down the aging process when we're enjoying things high in genistein. Tofu is where it's at. That's where we find a lot of genistein.
Nice.
There is also isoflavones in tofu. And I wrote this down because I'll never remember. It is involved with this signaling network, AKT, FOXO3, GSK, 3 beta, AR. Sounds super duper sciencey and complicated, but this has shown to inhibit cell proliferation. So cell proliferation is when a cancer cell is kind of grown and spinning out of control. It helps inhibit that process. So you can see how now tofu has these wonderful properties that we should think about incorporating a little bit more in our overall SAD diet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Okinawans eat probably 3 times the amount of tofu than we do here. It's just a regular part of what they're eating.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Amazing. And we also see observationally that the Okinawans have very low rates of breast cancer as well as prostate cancer. So that was part of the observation for why tofu and other soy products are not necessarily dangerous or harmful for someone who has had cancer or is at risk for cancer. We find that it's actually protective. So thanks to the Okinawans for helping us understand that that is a myth and we don't need to be afraid to eat soy products.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was a lot.
Well, I know, I just keep going. I got more. We have to show this sweet potato.
Yes.
So the Okinawan diet is over half of what they eat in terms of calories comes from this very special tuber. It's a purple sweet potato. Now, hopefully you've seen, I got this at Whole Foods, but seasonally you'll find it at other grocery stores. Sometimes Trader Joe's has it. And it's a special little tuber. So yes, it's a potato, right? So here's the dietitians encouraging you to eat potatoes for good reason. So the Okinawans eat a lot of this sweet potato, and it's special because of its color. So that purple pigment is what lends additional properties that translate to our body. So when we eat those purple pigments, they end up being antioxidants for us as well as anti-inflammatory. So we know this has an impact to help promote a long life. That purple sweet potato. Crazy, right?
Crazy.
Crazy. Beautiful color.
Do you want me to review the Okinawan Harihachibu?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. The other thing I love to mention about potatoes is that they really are a package. So like, I think that's why the Okinawans relied on them, because it's not only is it
Delicious.
but it's a package. So they're getting so many minerals in there. It's almost like they don't have to eat much else because they get it all in one place, which is really, I think, quite remarkable. It's special.
Yeah. Well, it has this, that purple sweet potato has sustained them for generations.
Think about it.
Because if you look at where Okinawa is located, it is in the middle of the ocean, and then it's either the North China Sea or one of those seas over in Asia, and they're regularly
Yes.
challenged by typhoons regularly. And because these sweet potatoes grow underground, they're protected.
Yeah.
And so it was a reliable crop that they could grow over years and years and years, given the climate which they find themselves.
Yeah. And that's another distinguishing characteristic of the Okinawan diet. The Japanese diet is really high in rice because their climate affords that opportunity for them to use rice. But in Okinawa, they use the good old sweet potato.
Yeah, sweet potato. And there's certain, and again, the Okinawans really look at themselves as a separate culture. And there's certain things, behaviors that they have names for that are part of their culture. One of them is called Harihachibu, which translates to eat till you are 8 out of 10 full, which is what we were talking about a few moments ago. And really taking a second look at how full you actually are at the end of a meal, and whether or not you feel like you should be super full, and we're beginning to be more mindful about when you feel satisfied and you've had enough, right? And if you don't feel like you've had enough, ask yourself why. The Okinawans possess a strong sense of purpose, which we talked about also in terms of all of the cultures. And the word for that is ikigai, which translate roughly into that which makes one's life worth living, right? Imagine that. Think about when you don't have a sense of purpose and when you do. Life takes on a different quality. They also, we talk about that these cultures have a sense of belonging. And in Okinawa, they find that a moai, or a group of lifelong friends, provides a sense of purpose because they're doing things together, they're sharing things together, they're eating. It's a secure social network. And they also take care of each other, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, and financially, right?
Yeah.
And how much of the time are we so worried about money as we age and whether or not we're going to have enough and who's going to take care of us? They don't seem to have to worry about that as much as we do. And of course, they do a lot of gardening and walking and visiting. They make an effort to do that. And so often we just say, oh, I'm just going to sit in front of the TV. But imagine if you replace that activity with something that was active and how that would make a difference in your life. And I always say 1 minute of moving is better than no minutes of moving.
Yeah.
And so we really want to begin to think about that. Now, we're going to move into our recipes because we're going to
Demo time.
Yeah, it's demo time. So Lori is going to demonstrate the Goya champuru, and it's a really
What did you
quintessential
just say?
champuru.
Goya champuru?
Isn't that how you said
Yes,
it?
it is. Yeah.
I thought that's how you said it.
I'm just impressed. I love it. So I wanted to pick a recipe that really seems to be quintessential Okinawan cuisine. So champuru is basically a stir fry, and it's one of the 3 styles of cooking that the Okinawans use. And so, think of a stir fry as basically just kind of throwing things together, right? So there are quite a few ingredients on here, you'll see, but it's simple. and they each impart great flavor.
Mhm.
So what I'm going to do is just warm up my saute pan, and we're going to use a little bit of sesame oil, if Debbie wouldn't mind throwing it in. Great flavor in sesame seed oil. We only need a little bit of it. It's going to offer such great
I'm gonna go
flavor.
around here so you can actually cook.
Yeah, and then you can maybe show things as I go.
Sure.
So we're just gonna let that heat up. Oops, or throw things. We're gonna let that heat up, and then so while I'm doing that, I'm gonna boil in salted water my bitter melon. So Debbie sliced up. She did the prep work for me already, but she sliced up what a bitter melon is. So bitter melon. We wanted to show you this. Think of it like a cucumber, but like a rough skinned cucumber with like pock marks on it.
Like if you've been to Fresh Farm
Yeah.
or Fresh Farm,
You'll see
the
it.
international markets or the Asian markets, you have seen these already. And then
Yeah. So what we do is now it's very high in fiber, very high, because you could see from the skin on the outside. That's rough, right? And Americans, as I mentioned, we don't typically eat a lot of fiber. So we're going to use this, and we're going to use a small amount. But when you slice it in half horizontally, you'll see there's these seeds on the inside. So also more fiber. So Debbie scooped those seeds out so that we can slice them into small rings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to heat that up, because we're going to salt it and boil some of the bitterness out of that, because literally bitter melon is what it sounds like. It's bitter in taste. So salting the bitter melon will help bring out some of that bitter. And I also read that salt kind of blocks the bitter flavor taste receptors on our tongue, which is really interesting. So if you want to, and also in cooking it, it softens it, right? So it's a little bit easier in terms of digestion. So Debbie did that prep work for me. She boiled them for a minute, and then she quickly put them in an ice bath. So that's called blanching. And that stops the cooking process when you put it into the ice bath. So thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
She did it. So we're going to now, in our heated up skillet, we're going to add my sliced onions. I'm actually just going to grab. She laid everything out so pretty for me. So I think like this visually is such a great start, right?
I wanted them to see this
Yeah.
visually because
I appreciate that.
we chopped it all up, and I know everybody's like looking at chopping up vegetables like work is food, but I think it's super calming if you just leave yourself enough time. What we have here is ginger. This is fresh ginger. I'm not going to use the fresh ginger for my recipe, but you buy this root at the grocery store in the produce section, you peel it, and then you chop it in little pieces like that. And I also did chop Lori some fresh garlic. I don't ever do this because I just find it too labor intensive, but that's what it looks like when you're chopping it up.
Okay, so we're going to start with the carrot, the onions. It's going to smell yummy in here in just a few moments. And I just used a regular white onion, and then my garlic and ginger. And Okinawan cuisine is described as like Japanese with spice, or like with salsa, because there's a lot of spice and heat even in the Okinawan cuisine. And that's a good example. This garlic and the ginger really impart great flavor without the added salt, fat, or sugar, right? And then we're also going to add the bell pepper. And I chose red bell pepper really because of the color. I was just thinking, let's liven this up even more. But red bell pepper has even more vitamin C than does the green bell pepper. Actually, like double the amount. So we're going to let that hang out for about 5 minutes so things get nice and soft. La la la. Already smelling yummy.
So in the meantime, while that hangs out, I'm gonna start the mushroom soup, Okinawan cream of mushroom soup. And we talked about umami flavor, so we wanted to cook something with mushrooms. And we picked this lovely mushroom, which is a shiitake, and they're really flavorful, and they really have them pretty much anywhere now, but especially the international markets, they have such great produce sections. And Lori's going to use those in her recipe also. And they often will give dried mushrooms as gifts. And boy, I'd love to get dried mushrooms as a gift.
Good to know.
Right? And this is Lori. They include B vitamin, selenium, potassium, and ergothioneine. Did I get that right?
I love that. Ergothioneine, yes.
Okay, I don't know what those are for, but some varieties also contain beta glucans or vitamin D.
Yes.
And so here's what they do. They support the immune system. So mushrooms, they're good for you.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of integrative doctors using mushroom supplements, but boy, how nice is it that we can actually eat them, right?
Yes.
Because they're delicious.
You're going to retain more of the nutrition when you eat it in the food form. And it's going to be in a package again. So think about everything that Debbie just read off about the mushrooms. It doesn't have just that ergothioneine, which is super special for our immune support, but it also may have some things like vitamin D or beta glucans. And this all matters, right? So when we bundle all those things up into one, it's like everything we need, just like the potato, everything we need in that package.
I wonder where the cup of onion went. You see it?
That one in front of the Nisa.
Oh, so this calls for onions or leeks, and we really felt like we wanted to introduce leeks to you because a lot of people are a little afraid. This is a leek, right? And we don't really use these a lot in our cooking, but we really wanted to introduce it and kind of talk about how to use it. And so I cut off the roots at the end, and I'm gonna score it in quarters, right? And then I'm gonna slice it in little pieces. And the one thing about leeks is that they sometimes are dirty, right? Like not dirty, like a dirty old man or something. They have dirt in them. And so they need to be rinsed really well. So I'm going to take some of these. I'm going to use leeks and chopped onion in my soup. And I'm going to take some of these and I'm going to put them in a colander. I'm going to just toss them around underneath some water, just in case there's some dirt in there. And then we're going to throw them into the beginnings of our soup. In the saucepan, I have a little bit of oil, and I used olive oil. But I was going to use avocado oil just for something different.
Yeah.
But I did use olive oil.
So I'm going to add to this the saute. It's starting to come. The onions are getting translucent. There's a wonderful flavor or smell, aroma right now in the kitchen. It's the ginger's coming through as well. And when I buy ginger, sometimes you'll see it in potentially a big section. You just rip off what part you want, depending upon how much of it you're going to use. So I'm going to add my mushrooms now and just heat them through. And because we're using shiitake for the soup, I figured let's just use shiitake for the stir fry. You can use any mushroom, white button, whatever one you want. So we'll let them saute for a bit.
Oh, it smells so good.
I can't wait to eat this one.
Oh, you're excited to eat it? I'm surprised.
Why?
Because usually you don't eat that much of what we cook.
No. I trust us, and totally.
So we have the leeks and the onions in here now. And I'm gonna.
It takes a little bit.
So they're, and you know, what they're asking for is for us to soften up the onions and the leeks
in the oil a little bit before we start adding the other ingredients. And for the sake of time, I'm going to start adding the other ingredients. Okay? And so what it's telling us to do is to add the mushrooms. And so we're going to do that. But I did want to show you a little bit about, because sometimes mushrooms, it's like, well, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Right? And this is a weird little mushroom if you look at it. It's not very pretty.
No.
But they are so tasty.
So delicious.
And so what
Umami.
I did is their stems on a shiitake are really tough. So I don't necessarily use them. And I either cut them off or pull them off. And then I'll wash them. So you want to wash them really good because you know what mushrooms grow in. Right? So you want to wash them really good.
Food safety is
then-
important.
And then slice them up and use them as you desire. So that's a shiitake mushroom. They don't really smell much different than a white mushroom, but
No, but I think the flavor, it's probably my favorite mushroom, I would say.
Yeah.
I think they're delicious. And now I'm going to add to this our bitter melon that's already cooked. Hopefully most of the bitterness got sucked out because we heated it with water and salt. So we're going to add that. We're hitting all the different colors.
oh, it looks so pretty.
Yeah. And then also our tofu. So here comes some cancer fighters. Now we're really hitting it, taking it to the next level.
And isn't it funny how long we spent thinking that tofu wasn't good for us?
We were so worried about it. We
Yeah.
don't need to be. Yep.
And carbs too. Like, I'm not going to eat any more potatoes.
So if you think about principally what the Okinawans eat, it's very high in carbohydrates. If we're going to break down the macronutrients, they have a lot of carbohydrates. But they overall, just like all of the long living cultures, overall they eat less of them, right? So they're having them in the whole forms. It is primarily what makes up their diet, but it imparts good health, a lot of nutrition, and isn't to be to blame for their weight because they actually maintain a pretty healthy weight.
Yeah. Show them, pick that up and tilt it so they can see how pretty that is.
Yeah, we got some color going here.
Yeah.
And now we need some flavor for this. So I'm just going to whip up a sauce that goes into our stir fry real quick. So we have here soy sauce, but I actually bought some tamari, and this is low sodium tamari. So think of tamari being the miso paste that's been pressed. So it's like the juice comes out of the miso paste. That's what tamari is. And I like it because of the depth of flavor. I think it's more flavorful than is soy sauce. It's a little bit thicker as well. So if you're using it to dress something like this, you might want to go with tamari. If you have soy sauce, that's perfectly fine. So besides the tamari, I'm going to add honey and then some rice wine vinegar. And then a little heat because this is Okinawa after all.
Yeah.
So we have our honey here.
Oh my gosh, it smells so good.
It smells delicious in here. And
We can't wait till this virus is over.
I know. So we're going to add that with some water as well. Debbie has me all set. I love this. I'm going to put in a touch of hot sauce because both Debbie and I don't mind the heat. And then a tablespoon of cornstarch. This will help thicken the sauce. I'm just going to whisk that together in a bowl.
Boy, I don't know who opened this salt, but they were mad
It was
or
me.
something. Look at the salt.
You'd think I ate it like a gremlin.
Anyway, this calls for a little bit of salt, which I'm going to just throw in. And I'm using kosher salt. And a teaspoon of ginger. And so we showed you the ginger root, which I have here. Of course, I like this is ginger root peeled, but I like it for things to be really convenient
I
Yeah.
always use this when it calls for ginger. You just pop, it's in the freezer section at Trader Joe's or a lot of the other stores, and you just pop a square out. It's really great. And so I'm going to use this today instead. Although ginger is so good for you,
Oh
right?
my gosh, yeah. So, about all these herbs and spices, like we know that garlic and onions, that whole family has immune supporting properties. They're antiviral, antibacterial. Same goes with ginger. It's anti-inflammatory, so it's kind of like good for all that ails you. But it also has these antiviral or antibacterial properties. And a lot of people have traditionally used ginger as a digestive aid. It just kind of helps soothe the digestive system. And going back to bitter melon has clinically in research been shown to help control our blood sugar levels. So interestingly that, when you eat a mixed dish and especially high in carbohydrates, that something like bitter melon may help to modulate our blood sugars.
Yes. To this, I'm going to cream it, right? Rather than using
Yes.
cream and butter, we're going to be using soy milk because they really do eat a lot less dairy than we do, a lot less. And so we add the soy milk to it, and boy, it really does look like a cream of mushroom soup. It really does. I don't know how I can show this to them.
I know I have to take it out.
Anyway, it really does look like a cream of mushroom soup. We're going to heat that up. And then, and the other thing I wanted to show you about ginger is that it also comes powdered.
Yeah.
And we got this at the Spice House, which Lori and I love the Spice House. Any of those spice stores we just love. We encourage you to support them, especially during this time. Their Spice House is online. They have stuff online now. But anyway, we got this at the Spice House. The spices are really high quality, and it's a family-owned business, which is so nice.
Yeah, love that.
And so we're going to let that warm up a little bit. And then we're going to add our miso, which is going to add that flavor.
We're gonna get the umami bomb with the miso.
Yeah, the
I love
umami bomb. Is that what we're going to call it?
Yes.
Okay.
So I just added that sauce to the pan, and we're just gonna heat it through a couple minutes, and that will help to thicken the sauce as well. So I'm just gonna give it a little taste to try it.
What when you use cornstarch, how is it?
Okay. The bitter melon is bitter. So if you do not care for bitter melon, you might want to substitute something else in there. But try it. I encourage you to try it because it's going to introduce a whole new flavor to your taste, to your palate. And I think you might be surprised. You might like it. If you find it's too bitter or you really don't care for bitter, like I said, use something else in here. I would use maybe the radish, or you could use something like summer squash, like zucchini. I could see eggplant in here. Have at it.
That's the miso,
That's the miso going in.
and it's a paste.
And miso can be enjoyed as is to make different sauces or dressings. That's very often how I use it. Or you can heat it up and add it to something like a soup, like Debbie is.
I love miso. When I go to a Japanese restaurant, I really look forward to the miso soup that they serve. And you were going to talk, Lori, a little bit about the Okinawa, the dashi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So dashi is worth talking about. That is essentially the backbone of what a lot of their recipes consist of. Think of dashi like you would like a chicken broth or a chicken stock. So they'll make a big batch of dashi, and it typically has the miso as well as this seaweed, and then also bonito flakes. So bonito flakes you'll find in most grocery stores, and this is literally dried out and dehydrated skipjack tuna. That's exactly what they're using in here. And so and then they'll strain it off, and it gives us our dashi. So then they'll use dashi to make something like miso soup. But again, they use it in a lot of different recipes, just like we would use chicken broth. It imparts that umami flavor. I'm going to turn this guy off.
So you have to work with the miso a little bit because it just
goes in there and it's just like a lump.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of break it up a little bit. But the soup is done also. And look, you know, we did both of those dishes in 20 minutes,
Yes.
right? I mean, we
Super
did pre-cut all the vegetables, so that took a little while, but really, really some nice,
Super quick.
super quick, healthy meals. And I'm just gonna throw this in the bowl so that you can see
Yes.
what it looks like. And we're gonna have to taste it, right?
Yeah. And I would, this is just me, but I would probably take my immersion blender to it and blend that together. If you'd like a chunky soup, you could keep it as is.
I might blend some of the mushrooms.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like. I don't want to spill it on my laptop. And we're gonna, here, do you want to try some, Lori? or-
Yeah. This one. And then to this, what we're gonna do is just add some other interest, flavor, texture. So we actually have in here black sesame seed, but you can use regular sesame seed. You can even toast your sesame seed to bring out some additional flavor. I'm just gonna sprinkle that on top. And I think, again, this just adds that, kind of makes it special. It elevates the dish. And they would, you could serve this over rice or another whole grain, such as something like farro. I don't know if the Okinawans would put this in a sweet potato, but maybe. And it really is just kind of, I love a one dish meal, you know, where you put everything in there, easy cleanup. And there you have it. That's our champaru. So very traditional Okinawan dish. I also just want to show you some turmeric. So this is turmeric root, very similar to the ginger root. Okay, so they're in the same family. And this has this vibrant, beautiful color that's actually from a pigment called curcumin. And curcumin has potent anti-inflammatory properties. So you could easily, just like we did with the ginger, grate that and perhaps put that into the soup or into the stir fry. They also will mix it into a drink. So if you've seen, like, you know, the soy milk with some turmeric, you could make a smoothie or a hot latte using the soy milk and the turmeric in it. How's the soup? I can't.
It's good.
Yeah.
It needs a little salt, but it's very good, very creamy. And dairy doesn't like me,
No.
although I do like dairy. It doesn't like me. And I have to say that I just look at a cream soup and I'm like, oh no,
Yeah.
you know, because I know it has the potential to make me very sick. But I'm actually eating a cream soup right now that I was a little like hesitant to eat.
Great on a day like today.
And
Yeah,
it's
it's
pretty
delicious.
tasty.
It's
It does
delicious.
need a little, either tamari would be nice in it.
Yeah.
Even bonito flakes would be nice in it, you know, give it that little, or just plain salt. Boy, it's 12:55, Lori.
We did it. We did it.
So we really hope that you guys enjoyed this edition of Longevity Kitchen Okinawa. And we will look forward to seeing you at our next installment of Longevity Kitchen.
Yes.
And we will be talking about,
We are going to Sardinia, Italy,
Mhm,
and that's scheduled for 2 weeks from now.
I think so.
2 weeks
Let's
from
wait,
now.
you know what, I'm just gonna check real quick so we can give them the date.
And hopefully you get a chance to get the information ahead of time. We'll continue to send that
The
to you.
26th.
So it's scheduled for October 26th.
Yes.
Might get very spooky in here.
Oh, are we gonna come in our costume?
We might have to. And yeah, we're gonna go to Sardinia, Italy. One of our favorites. It's interesting that the Mediterranean, two regions in the Mediterranean show up out of the 5 in the longevity series. So
Yes.
we're gonna talk all about those Italians.
Yeah.
It's on an island again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
Very interesting. So nice to see everybody. We'll see everybody, and we hope to see you next time.